several decades down the line. This is the turn of another millennium, a new century, but the impacts and in the first instance, the factors that even gave rise to that war are still forming the crux of discourse across the world till tomorrow, especially for students of politics and international relations. But the question is, 8 decades down the line, has the world learned anything from that very gory event and the repercussions it has had on a global scale? What should we learn? How can we apply those lessons going forward? Especially when you look at the fact that there are people who are still saying that, looking at the elements that led to that war in the first instance and some of the recent events we've seen across the world, there's a chance of a third world war. Well, others say it may not be a full-blown war. It may not be, war as we know it, all right? But the fact that you now have poverty on a scale that is very daunting, all right, across the world, including in Nigeria, for example, you now have challenges in terms of how governments make decisions, all right, financial challenges, issues around inflation, for example, and then with Donald Trump and his barrage of tariffs. I mean, you put all of this together, it becomes a potpourri of a lot of problems that some persons have said is probably worse than what would have been a full-blown Third World War. But what exactly are the issues? What should we understand by way of context and perspective as the world now commemorates the end of the Second World War, which actually, if you like, abolished the League of Nations and brought about the United Nations? My guest today is Global Television's in-house analyst, respected, distinguished Professor Ibrahim Abubakar is our security and political analyst. Prof, again, good morning and welcome to the program.
Morning.
I want us to begin from first, what led to the Second World War? Because one would have thought after the First World War, I mean, never again, as the good book says, affliction will not arise a second time. But how did it happen that the world experienced a Second World War?
Well, from the propagandists, the Second World War came up because of the invasion of Poland by the German soldiers in 1939. But was it really because of the invasion, or it was a crisis of personalities? Was the war actually because the Germans invaded Poland? The answer is no. Because if Poland is a close by country to Germany, what brought the rise of American, the involvement of the British and the rest? It was an interest. The power wave after Adolf Hitler took over governance in Germany in 1939, the speed wave he was making from 1939, from 1933 when he took over to 1939 was like, what magic is this young man performing? And this was not about magic. It was about an excess of work template that he has made over time. Remember that he was in the military during the First World War and become a political leader or one of the political leaders under the Nazi regime.
Right.
So that Nazi democratic movement from military transforming from the military to civil rule brought about a lot of popularity for him, who originally was born in Austria.
Not even in Germany.
Not even in Germany in 1889. So recognizing that he's a German, not an Austria, biologically, and seeing what was happening in Germany brought him back to Germany in 1913. So the young man who was already 24 years coming back to his country was a force because he recognizes what his parents has told him. He recognizes the impact of what his people were going through and what he feel will liberate his people. So invading Poland was because the Polish people did not want to recognize Germany as a part and parcel of the German movement. That is the way it was. But because of the interest of the Britons, who now incorporated American and other nations into what was the invasion after the First World War, and addressing the problem of the First World War in that first 6 years of his regime, actually was the Britons were not comfortable. And they started a propaganda war against his regime. And that he never wanted to take lightly, because he has built Germany for the 6 years, and that 6 years was something that was like a revolution, an evolving revolution that brought the true meaning of Germany into the Germans. So that is just what happened.
And then
He never planned
a war.
a war.
So that war was inadvertent to a large extent. But let's talk about how the war played out, really, because at some point it was not a case of you having nations across the world who either took side in favor of Germany or against Germany, and they had those who wanted to be neutral. What were the factors that informed positions and alignments and realignments?
You should know that when today we speak about Germans, we just speak German as everybody speaks the German language. We forget that there is the Fresians, the Serbs, the Italians, the Greeks, the Russian. All of them are languages in Germany, the Turks. So when you come back to that, everybody wanted to play out a superiority power. So why must it be German that becomes the lingua franca? And you should know those who are speaking Italian language has a root in Italy and has a support force. Those who speak Greek should also want a support from Greece. And the then husband to the queen was also a Greek man. So these are the support base. These are the political triangles that was affecting the leadership of Adolf Hitler. So if you look at this support basis, you find out that the Italians are there, then the Turks were there, so the Russians were there. So it was a link of who do we support. Good enough, somebody like Horrelbeck was a Russian German who was actually talking to the Russians, speaking to the Russians. Good enough, he was like an orator that was talking to the people, speaking to the minds of the people. What we don't understand here is that there's a difference between a thin line difference between talking and speaking. So all what Adolf Hitler was doing was speaking to the minds of the people, not just talking. Because talks may not have some actions, an element of actions, but speak to the mind of the people, because that is what the people are going through. Most of the things we don't do here, or all other nations don't do, is we talk without speaking to people. So he spoke to them and he took them as action plans.
So you're saying one of the things that did work for Adolf Hitler was not just that he was a phenomenal orator, he was persuasive.
Yes, that worked a lot for him because he was speaking And it was the speaking did, and over years he was able to build what later become the German machines. Over years he was able to collapse communism and other factors that was weakening the German people, and was able to build capitalism, and that has worked for Germans up to tomorrow. So they called it the German machine because of what it has implanted in them. So if you look at the economy meltdown that raveled all over Europe the last time, it never affected the Germans. He never affected the Germans because he has made them become very good workaholic people who were looking inward than outward. If you go to Germany today, you will never know there is any minority tribes or majority tribe. Everybody is a German. Here we have tribes, but everybody is ready to express to himself that I am not this, because nobody has been able to speak the truth into our mindset.
But I mean, you were talking about Adolf Hitler now from a very sterling perspective. I mean, anybody listening to you talk about this will have a bit of admiration for Adolf Hitler. However, the reverse has always been the case. History paints him as, persona non grata, as someone, a despicable character. How do we strike a balance based on facts?
You should also know that history has never recognized heroes, mostly when those heroes are playing a part that stands over time. Though that has, I have said it here that there was a lot of propaganda. How many people did German colonize? How many nations in Nigeria, in Africa, that German colonized? So it is a small web of people against the whole world, and you cannot be a success builder when you also have fundamental hatred. If we come to, let me use a little of Nigeria as an example. If you come to Nigeria today and they are talking of looting, stealing or so, the first thing anybody will tell you is Abacha. But I can categorically tell you that Abacha never stole any Nigeria money.
So who did? All the things we hear about Abacha loot.
They know, because when you cannot penetrate somebody, you called the cat.
So you give the dog a bad name to hang it?
Yes. So that was what happened to Adolf Hitler. They know the speed the young man was going, and he was going. It will be difficult for them to contain him. Remember, there were so many, if you have read the history very well, there are so many factors, like the Turks were not even a factor to him, but the Italians, the Greeks, the Russians, who were minorities in Germany, were actually a lot of headache to him, including the Jews. So for him, if you hear a propaganda, you will hear a propaganda that over 6 million Jews were either murdered or killed.
That's in the Holocaust.
Yes. So, but what was the population, the entire population of Germany as at that time, that you think that 6 million Jews were actually?
So you are saying history has been distorted?
Yes, there was no 6 million Jews anywhere in Germany. Because as of today, I think the entire population of Germany is not up to.
But was there an annihilation at all, whether 6 million or less? Was there any sort of annihilation, masterminded by Adolf Hitler, of the Jews?
Yeah, it's like when I'm talking to Nigeria sometimes and they tell me what could be the solution to the problem. I said we have to go back to the drawing board. But you actually want to solve Nigeria problem, there must be a revolution.
No, my question is, did Adolf Hitler not kill the Jews in numbers, whether 6 million or less?
The Jews were they in support of the movement that the Nazi Democrats were giving? No. The Jews were either spies, they were all working against his government.
While in Germany.
And so what would you do in such case when you have saboteurs among you? Even the fall of Germany in 1945 was also because of some of the Jews who were Germans too, like Dr. Orr, Dr. Obeck, Dr. Schulz, who were the scientists, among the scientists that discover or maybe design and develop what we call the atomic bomb. But also to frustrate the government of Adolf Hitler, took this blueprint to America. America was never the owners of atomic bomb. It was a German discovery.
Right.
So if you look at it, it's Kula, Schuskula, Dr. Orr, Dr. Obeck were actually betrayed that government. Where did these people come from? I think among them, apart from Schuskula, Dr. Schuskula, or Dr. Orr and Dr. Obeck were actually Jews. So you can see the massive betrayal from this class of people. It is already a case of coup. Remember that the same Adolf Hitler was incarcerated for planning to overthrow the government of Germany. In 1923, 1924, he was in prison. So if you look at those indices and what he went through to climb the ladder, the only thing that was in his mind was to build a unified nation, which of course he did. But people did not recognize his effort because there was Western propaganda. We in Africa and other nations, majority of the nation speaks English, and those who don't speak English speak either Italy, France, or Russia. So these were the problem he was facing. So it was a lone voice in the forest, or just a lone tree in the midst of other trees. I think most of those propaganda stepped from there. So nobody was looking at the ideology. They were not looking at what he was building. And if you are not looking at what one is building, you find that you are narrowed into a space. How many? You are a lone voice in the voices of billions. So what impact will you make? But the little the impact he has made was what makes the other components to feel threatened. Scientifically, technologically, administratively, management, and otherwise. And it has a fundamental wings of security, because the moment you captured the security sector, being a former officer of the German army, he has already gotten a clip to what to do, what it is, because he has a mission before he came from Austria back to his country, which could be his fatherland.
Now, incidentally, we wouldn't be talking about the United Nations today if the Second World War had not ended. In fact, the United Nations is it follows the end of the Second World War, having abolished the League of Nations and all of that. Just let's talk about the United Nations for a minute. There are those who say that the United Nations has outlived its importance, its necessity. That in fact, it is just there nominally now. It's not making any impact 80 years down the line. Do we still need United Nations today to, quote unquote, coordinate the affairs of the world?
That is where we are having it wrong. It's just like most of the time I used to talk when we have a lot of commissions in Nigeria that are called commission agents. That is how the United Nations is today. Because it is being controlled by America and Britain. So any other nation is significant.
Including Russia and China?
Yes, all of them are insignificant.
Even though they are in the Security Council?
Yes, they are insignificant. So the United Nations itself has actually outlived its importance and its significance. Unless we are going back to the drawing board to see how do we bring up an organization that has the interest of every other nation in its place. Remember that before now, we don't have anybody in Africa as a whole, as a continent, has no representative in the United Nations Security Council.
Right.
Which is, so if a whole continent has no representative in the United Nations Security Council, means that you are just a contributor, you are just a figure.
At least we have an observer status.
So, well, observer status does not permit you to vote.
Doesn't vote, right?
It does not permit you to become an executive member. You don't have any right.
So you're almost inconsequential.
So you are not. You are very, very consequential. Very, very. So many nations like that. How many representatives do we have in Asia? So you should know that the stronghold and the control of the United Nations Security Council are actually American and Europe. So any other nation is just insignificant.
Interesting. Let's take a break now quickly, because there's so much we need to talk about these developments. For example, as it stands today, what are some of the lessons we can take into our current reality to better our lives as nations across the world, at least beginning from Nigeria? And then second, you are asking yourself, do we still need to continue to talk about having a multilateral institution like the UN? Because like my guest professor has said this morning, there are people who have talked about how that the UN is only there at the behest of the United States and in part maybe a bit of Europe, but essentially, in what way specifically does the UN serve the overall interest of African nations, or the global south as these countries are now called? We'll talk about that and more after this break. Please stay with us. So, Prof, I think we should start from this point. I mean, this second half of the conversation, right? The UN has several agencies dispersed across the world doing great work, as they say, all right, humanitarian and all of that. If we were to abolish the United Nations, for example, what becomes of these agencies of the UN, right? And then, of course, how does that impact the work they are doing? Look at Nigeria, for example. The UN has agencies right on the ground who are trying to attend to those who are being impacted adversely by Boko Haram insurgency and what have you. Are we taking that implication into consideration at all?
If you say the UN, has the UN ever given an account of their administration, their management, and give account to Nigeria and what we are contributing to the UN? And who are the funders of Boko Haram? Do I give you 5 naira behind and collect 100 naira outside? Does it make any sense? Why has the UN not say, how do we end the problems or the security challenges that Nigeria has? Does it take them anything to do that? remember that most of the things we do here on the security space are laughable. Laughable in the sense that some of the security agencies will tell you that the bandits, the terrorists are people you cannot identify. But I think we went to Zimbabwe for the gorilla thing. We stopped it in Zimbabwe. We went to Liberia. We went to Sierra Leone.
Right. Ecomac.
These are even places where we are not familiar with the terrain, and we try to come back. So what is wrong here? Where the people were the same people who were in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, were they visible? They are the same thing like the bandits.
But there are people who say that Ecomog, like you mentioned, Liberia and Sierra Leone, for example, I mean, those were decades ago, essentially in the 90s, but now we're looking at sophisticated crimes, right? Does that not change the dynamics for the army and for the
fights? There is no dynamics that has changed so far. So if the criminals or the terrorists have changed dynamics, are you saying that the security system or the security web was all sleeping and sluggish at this time? They did not scale up. They did not improve. They are still stand still where they were. So everybody can take them at the mall. If you go back to the Nigerian Defense Academy, is it the same Nigerian Defense Academy in the 80s and 90s that the Nigerian Defense Academy is today? Remember, in the 80s, they only issued diploma. Now they issue degrees. So why didn't they stand still and issue diplomas up to today? So we shouldn't, when we are discussing on areas like this, we weren't having cyber security anywhere before. There's cyber security in NDA today.
As a course.
As a course. So they shouldn't limit us to that kind of discussions where we just brainstorm on things that we know are not true, because the institutions here that are training has add up. If you go to Oji River where they train the police detectives, it's not the same thing that it was earlier, that it is 30 something years ago. That is not the same thing. So if you go to the police detective college now, it is not the same thing that it was 30 something years ago that it is today. So people should not tell us that the criminals has up their game and the security service sector is still remaining in one point. It's not true. So what they have done, what magic did they perform in Liberia and Sierra Leone, in Zimbabwe and other places, Cambodia and the rest, that we cannot perform today? That is the question. And this is our country. We left here to Cambodia, and we did what we are supposed to do there. Even when the terrain is not our terrain, we did the same thing in Zimbabwe. We went to Lebanon. So why are we still finding it difficult in our own terrain to get a solution to this issue? Why are we looking at UN? UN is reaping from what? So if they bring in one naira, they are only giving it as a humanitarian service to the people, but they are taking away 100 naira from us. We like it, we don't like it, but that is the truth. So who is gaining? And the same thing is they are using propaganda against us. It is like the situation is very overwhelming and it has no solution. Has the United Nations actually prefer any solution to our issue?
Do you think it's time countries began to take practical steps of, if you like, delisting themselves from the membership of the UN?
I don't see any reason why I should contribute to an organization that does not recognize me.
Should Nigeria leave the UN?
Very well. Very well. They are doing more disservice to us than service.
So Nigeria as a country will be better off without membership of the UN?
Even Africa will be better off.
I'm asking that question because we now have Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger Republic that have left ECOWAS, and we've seen ECOWAS try to appeal to them to come back to the fold, which they have refused to do. As a matter of fact, in the case of Burkina Faso, we are now hearing that they are dropping French as lingua franca to pick Hausa instead. Should we use that model for UN membership as well?
That is what the Germans fight for. Today, it is very difficult for anybody to speak French, talks, sub, Italian, Greek, and Russia as a language in Germany, because people like Adolf Hitler has stand on their feet and said we have to speak the German language. Yeah, we still look at it as which language should be chosen if this one will not bring trouble. So you find out the Yorubas, they said the Yoruba is a majority language. Some said Hausa is majority. Some said Igbo is majority. But I can categorically tell everybody that the Igbo as Igbo is not more than 6 local governments in the whole of the East.
All across the 5 states in the East?
Yes. And if you want to talk of Yoruba, Yoruba is not how many local governments that are pure Yorubas. From Ife to Ede down. An Ibadan man cannot tell me he's a Yoruba man. Neither will Ijebu man tell me he's a Yoruba man. So the whole of Ogun State are not Yoruba.
The entire Ogun State?
Yes, they are not Yorubas. Not coming to Ekiti or Ondo, or you come back again to even Oyo. This is it the Saka man that will not tell me that it's a Yoruba man or the Awori man. So you can't come back. If you come back, you find out that these languages, then you come to Hausa. We have the Hausa Bakwai and the Baza Bakwai. So if you come, you just have Daura, Castina, Futua, Zaria, Kano, Hadija, and Bauchi. And the Bauchi is even some very minor Maik place in Bauchi that are the Hausas. So if you go by that, you find out that the people we regard as majorities are actually minorities, because the Nupis from the north are more than the Hausas
in their numbers.
Yes. So we are the ones who are enslaving ourselves by saying this is a majority. To me, every tribe in Nigeria are minorities.
If the powers rested with you, what language as it stands today, given all of these elements you have enumerated, would you pick as the lingua franca?
Any language can be picked as a lingua franca as far as that language is more fluent to people, will be more friendly to the people. To me, I don't care.
And we not have a blowback from the Britons.
No, you see, this language thing has affected us because the Britons, the Americans, the Canadians, all of them are holding grip on us because we speak English. The communication is in English. So, but when we change to a language that is ours, the respect comes back to us because we are developing our IQ with the language we know and understand. The science, the technology, everything that has to do with it comes from our own language. That's the part the Germans built. So you cannot say I am an Italian because Italian is part of the languages that were in Germany before, Russian and the rest. You have Greek. So you have the talks. So the facial and the sobs were not familiar languages. But when they pick up the German language, these other languages have to respectfully collapse together. So it was difficult for anybody the institutional bodies to come in. And that aggravated what becomes what it is. So the real industrial revolution in Germany came after Germans identified themselves that we are Germans and we are speaking German language.
Okay, so let's move further and talk about the elephant in the room. From what you know today, I mean, you are a researcher, you are a scholar, you are an academic, you are a political analyst. Do you think a third world war is imminent?
The third world war we are speaking about today is not the war that we are going to carry arms against each other.
It's a different kind of war.
It's a different kind of war. That is what people should understand. The war is what we are just saying now. If Nigerians can just recall themselves and said, okay, we have built a web, we have built a set, we have built this is our set of revolution, we are not going to speak English today as a nation, and the rest we are going to do this, we are going to do this is the dynamics, and everybody is going to have the impact on the system, and we speak to the minds of our people, and everybody take it from that point. It will now become, we will now become a centralized nation. So the revolution will now be, we are not depending on you, even if you have colonized us. We are ourselves. We are not owing anybody. We are not indebted in any way to you. So we are enslaved because we are indebted to them one way or the other. Not just only financially that you are indebted to somebody. All the installations we have in Nigeria are hooked to another nation. So you can't control your infrastructures because the infrastructures are hooked to another nation. So if you go now, you see that today we are talking of power, electricity, and the rest. The arm, when it was collapsed, I'm just making an example. When it was collapsed, we now have generation already sold out, distribution already sold out, and we have transmission, which was the government. Now, the same transmission now has been changed into two, which is why into two? Why? Of what significant? How will it improve anything in Nigeria? Nobody is asking questions. But if, and this other system in transmission, we have just one central control unit, which is on Osogbo. So why did you think that the security or our power system will not? Because it is injected to some foreign bodies. But when we take over and said, we don't need these foreign bodies, we can do it on our own, you will find out that our growth template will be faster and more better.
There are people who believe, again, we'll circle back to Adolf Hitler. There are people who believe that Donald Trump, who is now railing against the entire world on account of his bunch of tariffs, shared some very fundamental attributes with Adolf Hitler. They say, for example, Adolf Hitler was more result-oriented as against being systematic. They say that he was not bothered about being politically correct. He wanted to do what he thought was necessary at that time. What lessons can African leaders, presidents, heads of governments learn or take from Adolf Hitler to provide direction and leadership for their people in this critical time?
You should look at the trust. You can look at how he transisted from coming from Austria and coming back to Germany, which is his homeland, and the transition into his military, and from military back to civilian, and how he transformed the nation. These are the wonderful things he has done that the press refused to carry because of that propaganda. If you look at also Donald Trump is actually not, he's American by birth, we agree. But his parents, his father is a German, the mother is a Polish. So what Donald Trump is doing is that he's following some of the footsteps, if you say, of Adolf Hitler. So it is not about there was massacre or no, there was nothing like massacre. There is no way that somebody will plan against you or sell your information to another nation and you are going to take it just that way. So Donald Trump, knowing where he comes from, he needs changes, and the changes must be dynamics. Of course, he has a cabinet that may make it work for him or may mirror his directions, because he has some few years to go. This is not his first term, so he has served before and is serving the second thread of it. But if the cabinet allow him to execute what he's executing, he's trying to execute, and if the legislators will also give him the homework, he will be able to achieve much for America.
Okay, let's wrap it up, Prof. Well, I know this is not new to you. A lot of people believe that there's a new world order now playing out already, whether we want to admit it or not. Is that your position?
A new world order playing it out. That new world order, as usual, let me bring the new world order into play. The center of this new world order is actually African nation. Europe has overstretched itself. America has overstretched itself. So the new world order is supposed to be African and Asia. But why there is still foot dragging is because the superiority game is still playing on. And that would take a lot of time for us to identify that we have been living in ignorance and we are supposed to get out of the web of ignorance into the web of knowledge. So Africa has not been able to identify that they have all the potentials. They have everything that it takes to become the new world order, to stage the new world order. Why Europe has overplayed their own rules and they don't have all the potentials they have now is not up to 5%. Why we still have up to 95 to 97% of our potentials not tapped. But 95% of their potentials has actually been tapped. So they are struggling. And that struggling makes it more they are relying on Africa and Asia. So where do we fit in the new world order? Is we have to identify our vulnerability, our weakness, and build a stronghold from it. The stronghold also tests on our leadership. Are our leaders strong enough? Are they knowledgeable enough? Do they understand the temerity of leaderships or the dynamics of leadership? So most of the people we call leaders don't even know the dynamics of leadership. So they don't know where to head to as we speak.
All right, Prof, I'd like to say a big thank you to you. I was going to talk to you a bit more about these three nations in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger Republic, whether or not Nigeria should follow that model, because they're trying very hard to wean themselves away from the influence of France and all of that. But I'm sure this is a conversation we can have some other time. Thank you so very much, Prof.
Thank you very much.
Your insights as usual.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we'll leave it here at this point, everyone. Well, the program continues. We'll see you again after this break.